Setting the rules, the House of Representatives finalizes the guidelines for the impeachment vote against President Donald Trump. We have a report and reaction. Fight for the unborn. The acting White House Chief of Staff meets dozens of Catholic leaders. We hear from one of them. Budget battle. Lawmakers will vote on a $1.4 trillion spending bill. Why pro-lifers support the measure. And many happy returns. How Pope Francis celebrated his 83rd birthday. On EWTN News Nightly for Tuesday, December 17th, 2019. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you for joining us for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Jason Calvi. The House Rules Committee debates ground rules for tomorrow's final impeachment vote. Lawmakers will decide whether to impeach President Trump. Now, over in the Senate, party leaders battle on how to run the trial. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell rejects Democrats' push for new impeachment testimony.
The Senate is meant to act as judge and jury, to hear a trial, not to rerun the entire fact-finding investigation because angry partisans rushed sloppily through it.
McConnell criticizes his Democratic counterpart, Senator Chuck Schumer. He put out a letter suggesting Senate trial protocol.
My letter was intended as a good faith proposal to kickstart the discussions that Leader McConnell has so far delayed in scheduling.
That Schumer letter calls for keeping the bipartisan spirit of the procedures adopted in the trial of President Clinton in 1999. But McConnell argues
he is simply trying to lock in live witnesses. That is a strange request at this juncture for a couple of reasons. For one thing, the 1999 version of Senator Schumer vocally opposed having witnesses.
Still, Schumer pushes to call top White House officials for the Senate trial.
To simply repeat the arguments that were made in the House and Senate when there are witnesses and documents that could shed light on what actually happened, why not have them?
But McConnell and Republican senators say they intend to have a speedy trial. Let's go straight to Capitol Hill with Senator Mike Bruan, Republican from Indiana. You've said this impeachment process has been tainted from the get-go. What's going through your mind as the House gets ready to vote tomorrow?
You know, I listened to what Leader McConnell said, and I agree with him 100%. For me, since this thing was orchestrated from even before President Trump was inaugurated, the Mueller report fell flat, and then they scramble to use this issue. Their case, to me, has been weak from the beginning because it was founded upon the whole fact that they were just uneasy and very disappointed with the results of the election. So this doesn't surprise me, including kind of the parlor tactics of Schumer actually wanting the witness request when he knows he didn't agree to it 20-some years ago. You know, it's kind of makes a guy like me, who's been here a year, wonder how this place operates, let alone when you're in the in the midst of something like this. It is serious, especially when it's been litigated from the day President Trump took office. That's what bothers me mostly.
So one of those big questions which you just addressed was the issue of witnesses and whether or not the Senate should call witnesses. It sounds like you're against that. Why?
Well, because I don't think it's going to lend any further to the equation. It reminds me a lot of the Kavanaugh proceedings, which occurred, I guess, what was that, October of 18 or September, where there was an attempt when the case was falling flat or apart that they wanted to extend, try to find more information. I think when you take on a challenge like this, a journey, you better be prepared. And I think from the beginning, it's got unwholesome foundation, and now it's playing out. And that's why I don't think there's any senator on the Republican side that's going to, be able to be swayed if there's not any new information. And look at the time that's been spent already to where we haven't been getting other stuff done. So I will go into the trial listening to everything, but I believe trying to call witnesses at this point, where do you start and stop? They're not going to want us to call the Bidens or the whistleblower. So I think it's a ploy, knowing that it was never going to happen in the first place.
I know Republicans right now are unified. I'm just wondering, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell says he is working with the White House on this impeachment issue. Is that appropriate to work with the people you're about to be hearing from in a case as an impartial juror?
Well, I think there's been confusion, too, in that they're trying to compare this to a trial. I wrote an op-ed that pointed out that we as Republicans have been called out as being partial, having a point of view. What about the presidential candidates, which I cited, that have been calling the president a disgrace, shameful? This is not a court of law. It'll have some of the characteristics of it, but it's a political exercise. And when you take on a political exercise, it's going to have a different process and a different conclusion, especially when it's so poorly founded, to where no direct testimony, there was no quid pro quo, aid was not, they got the aid. And when the president of Ukraine says there was no coercion, no pressure, I mean, there's no case there. So I think we've wasted enough time with it. That's why I want to get on it. I think January 6th looks like when we take it up, assuming articles of impeachment are voted upon tomorrow evening, like we're all expecting, and then get with it, because most Hoosiers, most people I know, are disappointed that we're not doing anything on health care, infrastructure, all the other problems we have here, including structural deficits to boot. So
I really want to ask you about Indiana, because I know thousands of aborted baby remains were found in your home state, and then you introduced the Dignity for Aborted Children Act. How is this bill doing, and why did you introduce it?
Well, we passed a similar piece of legislation when I was in the State House, and that, by the way, recently was heard by the Supreme Court and upheld. So it means that some things can make it through, and I think, sadly, where this should be cascading back to really rein in abortion where it has gone, we're going to try to do everything we can to find victories here and there. Sadly, I don't think there'll be one Democratic co-sponsor on it, but we're adding Republicans every day. And it will not make it to the finish line because it won't pass in the House. And I'm sure Democrats in our chamber are not going to buy into it either. So, but that doesn't mean we can't keep pushing legislation to at least get out and talk about it. But no, it became a law in Indiana and upheld by the Supreme Court.
And it simply says that aborted babies should be either cremated or buried.
Yes, that you definitely have to have a process that's got a simple legislative guideline to avoid exactly, yes, what happened up in northern Indiana. That was a travesty.
Senator Mike Bruan, much more to talk about. Thank you so much for being with us, Republican from Indiana. Thanks for your time.
You're welcome.
And President Donald Trump says the scams and witch hunts never seem to end. But he says the American people are smart and see past the Democrats' impeachment inquiry. White House correspondent Mark Irons joins us. Mark?
Jason, the White House says it isn't worried about the president getting kicked out of office because there aren't enough votes in the Senate to have him convicted. Today, the president also lashed out.
Look, it's a hoax. The whole impeachment thing is a hoax.
President Trump shares his frustration with the impeachment process during an Oval Office meeting with the president of Guatemala.
It's a hoax, it's a witch hunt, and it's just a continuation. It's been going on now for almost 3 years, and it probably started before I even won the election.
And the president claims public opinion is swaying in his favor. He tweets, impeachment poll numbers are starting to drop like a rock now that people are understanding better what this whole Democrat scam is all about. On the verge of impeachment in the House, the White House is focused on what will happen next in the Senate. But presidential advisor Kellyanne Conway says no one is worried about the president's job security.
There is zero concern at the White House that the Senate has 67 votes to remove the president from office.
Conway says the length of the Senate trial doesn't matter.
Protracted or quick, long or short, doesn't matter as much as full and fair. And I can make an argument for both. Full and fair means you have many witnesses. It goes on for a long time because we need to relitigate what didn't happen or litigate for the first time what we were denied and deprived of in the House.
And today, the president sent a scathing letter to Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi, condemning not only her efforts toward impeachment, but also her prayers. Pelosi often says she prays for the president. He responds she is offending of Americans of faith by claiming that. Jason.
White House correspondent Mark Irons. Thanks, Mark. And on Monday, the White House hosted a meeting for Catholic leaders. A member of President Trump's 2016 Catholic Advisory Group was there. Lewis Murray told News Nightly that Acting Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney kicked things off.
He reiterated the president's commitment to the concern for the common good for Catholics in the United States, and talked about the successes that the president has had since 2016. He said President Trump pledged to be the pro-life president, and so far he has over-delivered.
Lewis Murray says other topics included religious freedom, job growth, and how faith-based addiction treatment can fight the opioid crisis. Murray says the White House plans more meetings with Catholic leaders. Protesters in India fight a new law providing a path to citizenship for non-Muslim migrants. Thousands of students flooded the streets in New Delhi to rally against the measure. The non-Muslim refugees entered the country illegally to flee religious persecution from neighboring countries. Government officials say the law makes India a safe haven for religious minorities. French teachers, doctors, and even Eiffel Tower workers walk off their jobs. They're protesting the overhaul of the country's pension system. The government plans to raise the retirement age to 64. France has struggled with nearly 2 weeks of crippling train and subway strikes. For now, the government says they'll stay firm. Pro-democracy protesters in Hong Kong expand their struggle from the streets to the stores. They're not spending money in places they think are hostile to their cause. An app tells the protesters if businesses are friendly or not. Yellow means yes, and blue means no. The pro-democracy rallies began in June in the former British territory. Pope Francis lifts the Pontifical Secret in cases of clergy sex abuse.
And now we have another law by the Holy Father that says that cases of sexual misconduct are not under the Pontifical Secret. That would be the highest level of confidentiality. That means, of course, that the question of transparency now is being implemented at the highest level.
Archbishop Charles Scicluna is the Vatican's expert on clergy abuse cases. He tells Vatican News this new law will open communication between victims, canon lawyers, and civil authorities. Hannah Brockhaus, senior Rome correspondent for Catholic News Agency, joins us now. What concretely did Pope Francis change in the legal proceedings of clergy sex abuse cases?
Well, Jason, what Pope Francis changed today was he lifted the requirement of the Pontifical Secret in 2 specific cases, in the legal proceedings of clergy sex abuse of minors, as well as when clergy are in possession of child pornography or in the distribution or acquisition of child pornography. So in these 2 cases now, he has abolished the use of the Pontifical Secret. A second thing he changed today was the Vatican's definition in church law of what constitutes a more grave delict. That just means a grave crime in church law regarding child pornography. Before, that was child pornography of a minor of the age of 14 or under, and now he has lifted that to be of age 18 or under. A third change he made today was to change the role of the advocate or procurator in Vatican trials to be able to be held by a Catholic layperson. Previously, that had to be held by a priest with a doctorate in canon law. It can now be a layperson with a doctorate in canon law.
A lot of these changes deal with that Pontifical Secret. Can you remind us what exactly is the Pontifical Secret?
Yes, Jason. So Pontifical Secret is a really dramatic sounding term, but it comes from the Latin secreto, which just means confidentiality. So what this was and is still is a level of confidentiality that the church holds for sensitive information regarding church governance. It's something a little bit similar to a classified classification in civil governments.
And then does this new law mean legal documents will be open to the public?
Not exactly. These legal documents and proceedings with trials will not exactly become public domain. There is still a level of confidentiality required by church law that will remain in place. But what it does mean is that there will be more transparency about these cases, and there will be an easier sharing of information between the people who do have legal jurisdiction over that information that have a right to be involved in that process.
Okay, Hannah Brockhaus, thank you for summarizing today's news, Senior Rome Correspondent for Catholic News Agency.
Thanks, Jason.
Coming up, analysis as the House of Representatives is set to vote on a more than $1 trillion spending bill. The Democratic-controlled House passes a $1.4 trillion spending bill. It averts a government shutdown right before Christmas.
The yeas are 280 and the nays are 138. The motion is adopted.
This spending bill has an unusually large number of add-ons from both Democrats and Republicans. It raises the age for purchasing cigarettes from 18 to 21. It offers tax breaks for businesses like craft brewers. It'll fund President Trump's U.S.-Mexico border fence. And the bill also keeps current pro-life protections. Joining me now to talk about more of those pro-life provisions within the spending bill is Autumn Christensen, Policy Director for the Susan B. Anthony List. Autumn, welcome.
Thank you.
So tell us what pro-lifers were praising the spending bill. What's good in this bill for you?
Sure. Well, all of the existing pro-life riders are protected. All of the poison pills that the Pelosi House tried to insert into the bill have been rejected. One that was particularly hard fought was called the Shaheen Amendment, which would have increased funding for U.S.-based organizations that go overseas and provide family planning and also promote abortion. So that was a particularly hard-fought battle, and we are pleased to say that the Shaheen Amendment was rejected.
So that's distinct from the Mexico City policy. That's President Trump's policy that bans taxpayer fund aid money going to foreign organizations that do or promote abortion. This is different from that, the Shaheen Amendment, which is scrapped. I mean, the House and the Senate, they did not agree to that Shaheen Amendment.
Right, right. So the Mexico City policy governs the funds that go to foreign-based organizations, but domestic-based organizations that receive funds under the family planning account do go overseas and promote abortion, and we don't want them to get a single dime of additional money that they could then use to try to overturn pro-life laws overseas.
So the Shaheen Amendment would have given money to U.S.-based groups, and they would have went overseas and promoted abortions. So
that's right.
But it's not going forward.
It is out of the package, and that is fantastic news, and we're so grateful to Leader McConnell, Leader McCarthy, and especially the President for their work to make sure that we maintained all of our pro-life policies.
And the President Trump earlier, when the Democrats took the House, he said, he wrote him a letter and said, I will veto any legislation that does away with current pro-life protections.
That's right, and that absolutely set the tone for the entire appropriations discussion throughout this debate over this fiscal year. And without that, we would have been in bad shape. So we're so grateful to the President for his leadership and drawing a line in the sand early on.
I do know, though, that some conservatives are worried about expanded they say that the abortion in Obamacare will be expanded, more expanded of taxpayer funding for Obamacare. Can you explain that, and is that a true worry?
Right. Well, what we're hearing is that the tax extenders will include an extension of some tax credits related to Obamacare. We absolutely want to repeal Obamacare and eliminate the abortion funding in Obamacare. We really need to get to a place where we have a pro-life Senate and a pro-life House as well as President Trump. And so our focus right now will be on getting to a place where we have that political will within Capitol Hill to eliminate Obamacare and fix those severe issues within Obamacare.
So the fight was on protecting the current pro-life protections and then looking to future battles in the future on Obamacare and its funding for abortion.
That's right.
Okay, I want to ask you about 2020 because it's right around the corner. Right. What are pro-life groups like the Susan B. Anthony List going to be doing in 2020?
Absolutely. We are looking looking forward to the 2020 election cycle. We are getting our grassroots activists on the ground ready to go. Our top priority will be re-electing President Trump and retaining the Senate. It's absolutely necessary that we have a pro-life president and a pro-life Senate so that we can continue to nominate and appoint pro-life judges. And then, of course, on the House side, we are working very hard to promote pro-life women who are running for Congress.
Autumn Christensen from the Susan B. Anthony List, thanks so much for coming on today. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Up next, analysis of a new study on the length of sermons in the different branches of Christianity. And happy birthday, Pope Francis. A new study says Christians have very different customs on the sermon's length. Pew Research Center says it looked at nearly 50,000 from more than 6,000 American churches. And guess what? It found Catholic sermons were the shortest. The Catholic preaches for a median length of 14 minutes. Mainline Protestant congregations' sermons reach 25 minutes, and historically black Protestants have the longest at 54 minutes. Joining us now to discuss the study is Father Charlie Gallagher, a priest at Immaculate Conception Parish here in Washington, D.C. Thanks for being with us, Father.
Thrilled to be here today.
So what are your thoughts on this study?
Well, I think it's a very useful study and helpful study, a good tool to help us understand religion in America. I think it doesn't really tell us anything we didn't know before, that the Catholic Mass, the center and the source of the Catholic Mass is not the homily, but the Eucharist. Therefore, Catholic sermons are going to tend a little bit shorter.
It's, the main focus is communion and the consecration and receiving communion.
That's correct. Yes.
So, it's interesting because Pope Francis had recommended a sermon length or a homily length of about 10 minutes. What is your takeaway on the proper or the best length for a homily when you're preaching?
So when I went to seminary in Rome, the homiletic professor, he was a Dominican, he recommended that we not exceed 8 minutes, which I think is a helpful tool, but I always found it a little restrictive. Sometimes there is a priest who is a natural orator. He speaks very well, he's compelling, he's captivating. If he's well prepared and well structured, I think he can go longer than that, 15, maybe even 20 minutes. But I think most priests should probably tend towards between 8 and 12. And I try to land around 10 minutes for my Sunday homilies.
And I know you talked about this in seminary. You had the Dominican that helped you. Dominicans are the order of preachers. They're known for preaching. When you're talking to young seminarians, young men discerning a priestly vocation, what do you say to them about a proper sermon, a proper homily?
Well, I tell them it should be something that is well prepared, that they should be spending hours on preparing. It should be something that unlocks the readings, in particular the gospel, and explains it. But it also should be relevant. It should give the people something to take home and help them during their week.
And Catholic sermon was the shortest, as we talked about. It was 14 minutes was the median length. When we look at our Protestant brothers and sisters, up to 54 minutes for the historically African American parishes. I'm just wondering what we can make of that when we're thinking about our Protestant brothers and sisters.
Well, I think there's a theological difference such that for most Protestants, the homily, the sermon, is the main part of their worship. And that's what people look forward to, and that's what Protestant pastors devote most of their time to. Catholic priests have a lot to do. We have schools to run, we have parishes to run, we have the sick to visit, couples to prepare for marriage. So preaching isn't the main thing that we prepare for all week. We should spend more time, I think, but we have a lot more going on. So there's a practical reason why it's shorter, but also a theological reason. And theologically, the Eucharist is the climax of the Catholic Mass, the source and the center. Therefore, the homily is meant to prepare us for that, not to somehow eclipse it.
On the other side of this studio wall here, we have a beautiful chapel. We have daily Mass when school's in session. We have daily Mass with various priests, including the Franciscan friars that come and celebrate Mass for us. And there's a big distinction between a Sunday Mass homily and a daily Mass homily. Usually the daily Mass homilies are pretty short. Why is that?
I try to do the same, and really daily Mass, I understand that they need to go to work, they're on their lunch break, and so for daily Mass, I tend to preach only about 1 or 2 minutes, just making one point for the people to take throughout their day and to maybe help them. We understand that most Catholics coming to daily Mass are coming for the Eucharist, and therefore I want to respect their time and to keep it brief.
Well, thank you for making a nice chat with us today, Father Charlie Gallagher, priest at Immaculate Conception Parish here in Washington, D.C. Thanks for your time.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it. And finally tonight, prayers pour into the Vatican in honor of Pope Francis. It's his birthday. The Holy Father turns 83, and a few days ago he celebrated 50 years as a priest. Today, Pope Francis received thousands of emails from around the world, and children sent letters in, and Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI also sent a birthday message. I'm Jason Calvi, and for the entire EWTN News Nightly team, we thank you for watching tonight. We'll be back tomorrow with more news from a Catholic perspective. Good night, and God bless.